So we are now officially recording the webinar, and we're going to get started in just about 30 seconds. Because we do have a lot of people that have registered for this event. I know that 72 people were registered. This is just a question for you, Koichi. What is the average attrition or dropout rate, so to speak, from the amount of people that sign up for a webinar on edufire and that actually participate on it?
That's a good question, and it really depends on the teacher and how much preparation they do before the class. And maybe Ron's a good person to actually put in some points on this, but I'll go ahead and talk a little bit. Like I've had classes, I think on average for mine, it's about 1/3 to 1/2 of the people will show up if it's a free class. If it's a paid class, the attendance rate is a lot better because, of course, people are investing in your class, and you know, they're gonna want to get what they paid for. But there are ways to definitely increase the attendance rate, like sending reminders, personal reminders to people, and there's a little feature there that lets you contact all your participants very easily. Reminding people, you know, being very specific about what you're going to be talking about in your webinar so that, you know, people know what they're getting and they're going to be more likely to show up that way. And, you know, I've seen free classes that get 70, 80, 90% attendance rate for, you know, pretty large numbers. And it does take a lot of work beforehand, but it's definitely worth it.
Couldn't agree more, Koichi. And actually, Jeremiah just mentioned in the notes section that I did send a message not too long ago. I wanted to make sure, and this was based upon your suggestion, which I thought was fantastic, which is a friendly reminder. Hey, you've got this webinar. Now, we know that edufire does auto-send those reminders as well. It's just a nice thing to keep in mind. We're going to look at this webinar as a universal webinar of webinars. We're not just looking at this as if you're running a webinar through edufire or just using Adobe Connect on its own, or using GoToWebinar, or using WebEx. In fact, we're not going to focus too much on some of the technology within edufire or within GoToWebinar, because there are similarities and there are differences. Instead, we want to focus a lot on those universal tips and those universal best practices to help ensure that you make a more powerful webinar. And I think that's a good kickoff, Koichi, to talk about this program and what we've called 10 steps to running a knockout webinar. We want to make sure we're going to go over those specific tips, and we have specific steps and suggestions within each of those steps that will give you some best practices. We're also going to throughout the rest of the next 60 minutes, various different things that have been very successful in our webinars. Koichi, could you go ahead and make a quick introduction to yourself, and then I'll do the same of why we're here and what we're going to be doing.
Koichi, I am the social media marketing manager at edufire.com, and I haven't been doing webinars as long as Brad has, and seriously, Brad is the expert on webinars. You're going to have to tell us how many webinars you give every week or every month. It's pretty ridiculous. But I'm excited to share what I've learned so far and what I've experienced so far, and I'm excited to hear from Brad as well.
Well, thank you, Koichi. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Wait, by the way, are you on the left or are you on the right? You're on the so you're always gonna so you're over there. Okay, so I'm pointing at you right now, right? Okay. As you can see, everyone, we try to have fun as well. And we'll talk about fun. We'll talk about inflection. We'll talk about all those wonderful things that you can do to help ensure that the individuals that are on the other side, you are engaged and learning the things that you were set up to learn in the first place. So we're going to look really from start to finish of conceptualizing for the webinar, marketing the webinar, getting people there, running the webinar itself, and follow-up. We want to make sure we cover the gamut. As I mentioned, my name is Brad Kleinman. I'm the Director of Education for WorkSmart Integrated Marketing. I'm a firm here in Cleveland, Ohio that we work with a lot of small businesses, but we also work with a lot of educational institutions to help them use the internet better and to help them use e-marketing and specifically social media and also web optimization and email optimization techniques to grow enrollment and to grow revenue, to grow their bottom line, whatever that may be. I've been able to run webinars for several years now. About 3 years I've been running webinars, and yeah, it gets a little ridiculous how much how many webinars it seems that I've been running. I've probably averaged about four webinars a week. I primarily run those webinars on the GoToWebinar platform. That's a product of Citrix Online. I'm a fan of GoToWebinar, but I'm also a huge fan of edufire. The main reasons, and I'm happy to send you the link to an article that I wrote on my blog about a month and a half ago on, I believe it was the 5 reasons why edufire kicks arse. And it specifically looks at part of the great advantage that a speaker, a presenter like yourself has to leverage the edufire platform is to be able to leverage Adobe Connect. You're looking at Adobe Connect right now, and you can see firsthand at how fantastic this technology is. For example, with GoToWebinar, I can't do what I'm about to do right now, which is just change my video around so it makes myself and Koichi a little bit larger on the screen. And now we're very large. Yes, and Matthew said, "Oh noes." I don't know exactly if he's saying that he doesn't want us to be that big or not, but I'm not going to take any offense to that. But just those types of things, being able to use the entire Flash technology so fluidly embedded into the webinar is just fantastic. So we'll go in more later in depth into some technology, but take a look at that blog article so you can see some of the different benefits of edufire as a whole. The other great benefit to edufire is that if you do want to run a webinar that is actually something you want to charge for as opposed to a free webinar, you can completely streamline that entire payment and registration process through edufire's platform. So I know this isn't an edufire commercial, everyone, and don't worry, it's not. But I did want to start by saying that I love webinars. Why do I love webinars? I'm going to show you some of the main reasons why I feel that they're fantastic. I want you to share with us some of your thoughts on why they are best. Actually, that's a good point to start. Koichi, what are some of your thoughts on webinars and why they're so important?
Well, I think webinars are, it's something I didn't discover until pretty recently, but I've really seen all the benefit from just being able to meet people from all over the world. Sometimes you'll have people from all the different continents, and it's just absolutely amazing to be able to connect with people no matter where they are, as long as they have an internet connection. I think that for me is the biggest thing that I enjoy about webinars.
When I did my first edufire webinar, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I didn't know who was going to be coming in on it. I didn't know if maybe there was going to be language barriers or differences in how I was able to get my point across through this platform. But I was so surprised to see the various eclectic demographic that was represented. We had people from France, and we had people from China and Japan, and it really was incredible. So I couldn't agree more that that flexibility across state lines, across country lines, across continental lines is really incredible. But we don't want to wax chaotic about webinars. We really want to make sure that this webinar is something that you also look at as an as an example of a strong webinar, of one that we want to make sure that we are drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. So we hope to do so very well. And with that, let's get right into the agenda. So we have made our introductions already. We feel that making introductions and why you're here, introducing the speakers, introducing myself and Koichi, and why we feel you should listen to us and pay attention to us is an important part to get us first started. So we are done with the introductions. The next part is we're going to go into some statistics and the basic benefits. Now, we just talked about a few. I'm going to look at what I see the 4 of the major benefits from webinars. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but we wanted to show you and share with you a few of those things. Then we're going to go into the 10 steps. Now, these 10 steps, along with specific steps that we're going to cover within each of those steps, will be available to you as a PDF that we've created for this webinar that we're going to mail to you after the webinar, along with the various links that we will that we will be discussing throughout the webinar. We're going to go over the 10 steps individually, and then we'll get into each of them and give you specific ideas for each. We'll do Q&A, and it looks like we already have some Q&A. You can go ahead and Koichi, is this an area where they can click on the session notes, or is this only available to us?
Be available to us, but hopefully one of us will be watching the chat pod at any given time.
Okay, so if you could, as we mentioned before the webinar officially got started, if you do have a question, try and ask it a few times. Koichi and I will both be keeping our eye on the chat area, but different than the GoToWebinar system, where if you do have a question, you submit it to a question box, and I can pretty much check off the questions as I answer them. It's something that I really have liked about GoToWebinar's platform. That also keeps you on check. It keeps you as the presenter focused on speaking on the content that you wanted to get across. Whereas if I was, for example, reading over what's going on in the chat area, I can completely get bogged down and not be able to focus on the great content that I've built for you as the participant to be able to see. So again, please present your question a few times, and specifically in the end of the presentation, when we go into Q&A, make sure you bring it up again. And lastly, we will close with some closing remarks. Now, we do want to make sure that we have fun. We do want to make sure that we cover as much of this content as possible. And with that, let's get into some quick stats. I want to present to you two specific stats. This one's actually just a study that Forrester Research did in 2007, and it found that travel for internal meetings and training is around $1,500 a trip. And this is normal in businesses. So webinars, there's no doubt that there is a fiscal advantage to being able to train individuals where, like you see right now, Koichi and I may be thousands of miles away. In fact, San Francisco, I don't even know exactly how many thousand miles away is it, but we're talking one-on-one. We're able to coordinate with each other. We're able to bounce back and forth from each other, and two minds, I keep pointing it the wrong way, two minds are better than one, and that's definitely can't be underestimated. And there was also another study that the Department of Education from the United States put on, and they teamed up with SRI International, and as you'll see, on average, students in online learning conditions perform better than those receiving face-to-face instruction. I mean, this was an actual study done through the Department of Education, for the Department of Education, that showed that online learning is working. This isn't just smoke and mirrors. This is a way that as people have, as our consumer habits have changed, as our brain has evolved over the past decade with internet and with the new technologies that are available to us, how we can learn is much more evolved and much more advanced.
One thing to add to that is that,
so let's go over. Yeah, go for it, Koichi.
Study is
no,
that,
go for it.
If you're teaching bad webinars, the online learning isn't going to be more effective. This of course relies on you teaching a good webinar and using the tools effectively, which is totally what we're doing today. So
I'm a big fan, Koichi, of hybrids. If for those of you who are not as familiar with a hybrid learning model, it's a mixture of an online training via either a webinar or online learning content driven through a learning management system, and complemented or supplemented by an in-person training program. That is what we have seen personally, and we do run a lot of programs with community colleges and continuing education departments. That is what we've seen as really the best way to bridge the gap between what we may be able to learn on our own and what we can learn in person, and how we can learn from each other in person. That is really what I would see as the utopia of training, when you can be able to bridge the gap between both of them. So let's go over four of what I see as four of the most important benefits. Of course, number one is to captivate and engage your audience. So when webinars first started, we couldn't have video being pushed like we're being pushing video through our pipes right now. We didn't have interactive polls. We didn't really have any other ability than just being able to share our screens. That was the extent of it. Some of the original webinar programs couldn't even record webinars, and as you'll see, is one of the other benefits is that's a huge benefit. This webinar, for example, is being recorded. You can watch this at any time you want, and with EduFire's connection with Adobe Connect, it's such a great system that when you sign on to edufire.com and you sign in with your username and password, it knows exactly which webinars you took and gives you access to those recordings right there. Now, if you're using GoToWebinar or WebEx, it's a little bit different. With GoToWebinar, it'll give you a WMV or a Windows Movie Maker or Windows media file, which you can then take into Windows Movie Maker. do whatever you'd like with it, and then make it available either through a social video site or through your own site where you have it password protected. So that is one of the great benefits, is to captivate and engage. Right now, actually, Koichi, while I'm speaking on this would be a good time to do a quick poll of the audience. If you could launch an interactive poll asking the question, have you ever run a webinar before? Very simple question, yes or no. Have you ever run a webinar before? And as you're bringing that up and as you open it, I'm going to go through our next few webinar benefits. The next benefit is that it bridges time and distance, and this one goes along very well with the study that was just shown through Forrester, which shows that people are spending a lot of money on training. Well, if you use the edufire, where you can do for free, if you're doing free programs, that obviously is making it so that that money is not necessary. So our time, we don't have to spend the time on the plane. We don't have to spend the time traveling to one another. We don't have to be in each other's presence to be able to learn from each other. The next one is the on-demand access for recordings. That obviously is incredibly powerful. This one will be available on edufire. We record every webinar that we run on GoToWebinar. Some of them we use as making them available for recordings. Some of them we chop them down and we use them as more marketing types of collateral that we place on our website and we place on other social media sites. But it depends on what your strategy is. The benefit, though, is definitely important. And then lastly, it's inexpensive and convenient. Even if you do go the GoToWebinar route, you're only looking at $100 a month for unlimited webinars that can be opened up to 1,000 people. For edufire, if you're doing webinars that are free, that are huge lead generators, and they are huge lead generators for us. If those are 100% free and somebody takes my program, I can then contact them and say, hey, make sure you check out our website and consider signing up for our email newsletter, thus getting us into the marketing system that we're going to talk about later when we talk about broadcasting and marketing your webinar. Am I missing out on any really important ones?
The only thing I'd add with bridging time and distance is that, of course, there's different time zones, which is both good and bad, but I think it's great because like if I'm doing webinars during the middle of the day like we're doing here, that means everyone in Europe, it's they're all home from work, and you can really take advantage of time zones and really target your audience that way.
That's very interesting that the study, and Matthew, I agree with you, it's interesting that only 1/3 of us, or 3 out of 10, have done webinars on the call. One thing that I want to make sure, because now that we know that a majority of us, a significant majority of us on the call, have not broadcasted a webinar before, is especially because of edufire's ability to make it so easy for you to do so and so free, I highly recommend you don't get paralysis by analysis. Don't think to yourself, is a webinar something that I should try? If you have something that you see as valuable content in your head, the only way you're going to be able to determine if a webinar can be beneficial for you is if you give it a try. So I hope that this webinar convinces some of you to give those webinars a try. Now, I also don't want you all to think that that's me saying that everyone can be a fantastic webinar producer, and I'm also not saying that I'm the best producer ever. What I am saying, though, is don't be scared if you look at webinars as something as a scary venture. We know that the most terrifying thing for most people is speaking in front of an audience. Well, for those of us who just break through and give it a try, you'll see that it becomes a lot easier over time. I work with a lot of people that are very good speakers in person, and then when they transition themselves into delivering webinars over delivering presentations over a webinar, they get very befuddled, and this not being able to interact with the audience really throws them off. And that's one thing that it is a large change. There's a paradigm shift, right? Where you have to realize that you're a good speaker. Have that confidence. We're going to talk later on about smiling and about having inflection and about using pauses and how much of an impact that can make on pushing your message. We're going to talk about that later on, but it's good to know. Thanks so much, Koichi, for running that poll. Let's go into our 10 steps. You're going to receive this as a PDF. We're going to send this to all the participants after, both the presentation and this one-page PDF that what I'm recommending is that you print it out and put it right there up on your wall just so you have it for when you're running your next webinar. Let's go through the 10 steps and let's go through each and every one. The first step, of course, is developing your content. We're going to look at some different ways to do so, some different suggestions for when you're developing, what should you stay alert of, and what are some best practices. We're going to look at testing, and actually along with testing goes the importance of running a dry run, what we look at as steps 2 and 3. Murphy's Law. Keep in mind, it's going to come into play. We're going to look at some different ways to market your webinar. We're not just going to look at social media. We're going to look at what your website, your email. We're basically going to give you a well-rounded look at different ways to market your webinar. We're going to take a look at your waiting room. Now, for some of you joined us several minutes before the webinar started, we do recommend that you get your webinar engaged. You don't wait right until the last minute to launch. When we first started doing webinars, that was what we were doing. Problem was with GoToWebinar, we weren't able to see who was in the waiting room. What we've decided to do instead is where we bring in some music. We say hello, we introduce ourselves a little bit. We don't get into the bulk of the presentation until we start. But then, of course, we're going to go over some starting your webinar best practices. We're then going to go into the importance of introducing both yourself and introducing the webinar. We'll look at your agenda. We'll look at delivering your content. This is actually number 9 is where I'd like to be able to spend a good amount of time because I see it as one of the most important. And then we'll talk about follow-up and survey. Let's get right into it. Developing your content. Koichi, before we get into the slides, why did you choose this picture for our first slide for developing your content?
Developing your content is a lot harder work than you might think, and if you build something that's cheap, then if you build a cheap house, then it's going to fall apart really quickly. So you want to build something strong, and you want to spend a lot of time building it, and it's more work than you think.
If you fail to plan to fail. That is a phrase that I think about a lot as it comes to webinars. Your presentation needs to be good. Now, we're not saying that this presentation is the best thing since sliced bread, but there is definitely, as you'll see throughout the presentation, we put time and we put thought and put planning into putting this presentation together. So the first one, and actually it's so funny that I mentioned that when I don't know why that second bullet came up first. This is, of course, something that we thought wasn't going to take place, which was that we were going to have a perfect webinar. It doesn't happen. The first one actually is in regards to defining your learning objectives. That is the first thing when it comes to developing your content. What is it that you really want to get across through that 60, 40, 90-minute webinar? What are your learning objectives that you want the participant to take away? You have to start with that, because if you can't define what you want them to take away, you're not going to be able to have a very strong webinar. Now, we know, as you know as well, our objectives of this webinar are that you take away several tips to make your webinar stronger, several best practices so that you can make sure that you're doing some of the things that we see the best in what they're doing, so that you can increase your efficiency and your effectiveness with your webinars. But what are your learning objectives? And make sure you have around 3 specific learning objectives for each webinar. The next one is storyboarding the process. So having a plan for, these are the main things that I need to cover, and we recommend putting it into an outline form first. So either using PowerPoint and getting that basic outline and that basic storyboard across, and then filling in content and filling in and improving. So what I like to do when I'm developing content for a presentation or for a class, whether it's a webinar or in person, is I'll create that outline first, and then I'll fill in the gaps and I'll fill in the holes and improve. There's also the importance of embedding imagery and graphics. Now, we're not saying that you need to have graphics all the way throughout your presentation. But it's definitely something that there's no doubt that having good graphics, even having video potentially throughout your webinar is something that's important. The thing you have to keep in mind when you do embed video into a webinar, for example, I've given webinars before and some of my speakers wanted to show a YouTube video during it, that's bringing in variability. And when you bring in variability, your chances of things going wrong increases. So if you can take a minimalist approach and become much more simple, the most important thing is that first bullet right there, which is making sure that you are achieving your learning objectives. But embedding imagery can keep your participants more engaged. Then it comes to design. Now, Koichi just brought up our next poll, which is, what do you use to create your content? One of the nice things about PowerPoint, which is what I use, and I am a Mac guy as well, I use Keynote, and I really like Keynote as well. But the thing that I really like about PowerPoint is some of the smart art objects, as well as the ability for you to just take a picture and apply any number of borders to it on the fly. Now, I know that Keynote has some of that as well, but it looks like 70% of us are using PowerPoint. I recommend, if you are using PowerPoint, get the most recent version. 2007 is quite powerful, especially for developing programs on the fly. Now, Koichi, you're a fan of Keynote, correct? Or are you using Prezi?
I am a fan of Keynote. I do want to start transitioning over to Prezi, though. I think Prezi, like if you just look at this list, all of these are basically either PowerPoint or a clone of PowerPoint with varying looks and styles. But I think Prezi it takes presentations in a completely different direction, and absolutely amazing, I think. And I really want to get into Prezi. So maybe a future presentation I'll use Prezi, but that's a good question. Matthew asks, what are some of the advantages of Prezi? It is really hard to describe. It's basically a big white canvas that you put content on, and then you move your presentation around to different parts of the canvas. You really got to go to the site and check out the video, but it's a lot different, and you got to wrap your mind around it a little bit. But
Yeah, I'm bringing up the website right now for everyone.
Oh, nice. How many of you have heard of Prezi? Or how many of you have not heard of Prezi?
Well, to be honest, I'm raising my hand. I have yet to hear about it, but I'm glad that you mentioned it during this webinar, because I will be taking a look at it, and that's definitely one of the to-dos that I recommend that everyone take a look at. We will be following up with an email after this presentation with the PDF, as well as the one-page handout and some of these other links that we will be discussing. So actually, that brings up a good point, and there's going to be a lot of good points brought up and things that we think about as we go along this webinar, because we really do look at this as we've got some framed content we want to show you, but a lot of this we want you to share as well. Remind people, and I like to do it up front, and I do it towards the end as well, about the fact that you will be sending them the PDF or the presentation, if in fact you are going to do that. I would say most of the time that's the question that I get. Am I going to get the presentation after this webinar? Yes, you're going to get it. Yes, you're going to get a survey, and those are the kind of things that we can build in automatically with GoToWebinar, to automatically give them a survey, to automatically send them an email notification. And with edufire, it's as easy as contacting the participants and putting in the necessary content. Now, Koichi, when we were talking about developing your content, we were building this webinar, we talked about KISS. What are your thoughts on developing your content with the KISS principle in mind?
Yeah, I think when you're creating content, it's so much easier to add a lot of information to make it complicated. In order to sound really intelligent, you want to make things really, really simple so that anybody can understand them. You know, you might, in all sorts of different things in life, you'll hear KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And you know, I think presentations that are the most simple really get the point across the most. I mean, if you think about like Apple keynotes, for example, or how Steve Jobs gives presentations, everything's very, very, very simple, and it has a lot of effect on people. Something else. And if we're moving on to the next point here, that actually it stays within KISS. And I would recommend, at least, and I don't know if we follow this rule completely throughout our presentation, but keeping 5 bullets per slide and avoiding wrapping your words. So when I guess I can't really draw in here, but if you wrap your words, then people have to move their eyes back to the other side of the screen. And what you really want is you want to have focus up at the top left section of the screen, and then kind of have people move down and to the right. That's how people's eyes normally move. And in order to get that information to people, you want to keep it really simple, one line per point, and no more than 5 bullets per slide. And in fact, I'd probably recommend a little bit less if you can.
You know, one of the things that Guy Kawasaki, he was one of the original evangelists at Apple, that he says in regards to investor pitches. So I know this is a PowerPoint to be delivered in an in an investor pitch in-person program, but he looks at it as the 10-20-30 rule. And he says, no more than 10 slides, no more than 20 minutes, no more than 30-point font. That's his 10-20-30 rule. Now, that doesn't always apply with webinars. The problem with in-person programs when you're using PowerPoints is that you do want to make sure you keep your size large so that that person way in the back can still see it. Now, everyone here is watching the webinar on your screen. It's not as important, but the same rule does still apply. And using that white space is beautiful. If you can really take advantage of it, that can make your content feel that much more powerful. And Koichi did mention the importance of knowing how our eyes move, read, and pull info. I'm fascinated by this subject of heat maps, where we look when we're looking at a website. There's some really interesting studies where they put lasers on people's eyes to see where we look on a website. First we look at the top, then we look at the stuff on the left side, then we look at the stuff in the middle, and it's called an F pattern. It's really some interesting studies. So make sure when it comes to web development or websites that you follow that rule. You want stuff that's most important up top, and keep in mind that that still goes into play when we're looking at webinars. The second one is test your presentation. Now this, of course, we have a nice woman that's testing her different chemicals. There are lots of different components that go into a successful webinar. The best way to be able to perform best is to make sure that you test. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but sometimes it just happens that way. Testing is what we see as, for the webinars that we have done that have had the most success, it's because they've been tested. So let's take a look at some of the different reasons why we test. The first reason is Murphy's Law. For those of you who aren't familiar with Murphy's Law, it's if something can go wrong, it will. You need to assume that things are going to go wrong. Already during this webinar, there have been a few times where either my audio or Koichi's audio or our video has chopped out. What we want to make sure is a few things. First, that we plan that type of thing is going to happen. By planning for it, by being consciously and intentionally aware of what could happen, it helps make us make sure that we don't look like fools if and when it does. You want to, no matter what, come off as professional throughout the entire time. And that we were talking about this right before the webinar started. Don't over apologize. In fact, I would say try not to apologize at all. Let the people know that you are having some technical difficulties, that if it really gets to be something where it's taken up more than 10 or 15 minutes of time and you just can't get it working, let them know that you will be recontacting them, rescheduling the webinar, and also let them know that this webinar, after it's performed officially the next time, it will be recorded. They will receive the recording. They will receive the PDF. So ensure them and give them that comfort that you know things are going wrong, but these things happen. If you continue to over-apologize and over-apologize, it's going to make you seem unprofessional, and we don't want that to happen. And a lot of that apologizing, and a lot of it has to do with technology. Now, before I was using Adobe Connect, when I wanted to push video through GoToWebinar, I would take a video screen and I would place it on top of my screen so that people could see it. And what was happening with that is it was pushing bandwidth in different areas, and it was causing my bandwidth for GoToWebinar to become a lot lower, thus making it so that everything I was pushing out to my users, wherever they were in the world, was a little bit more delayed. And we want to try and reduce that if we can. Turn off your Microsoft Outlook, turn off Skype, turn off TweetDeck, turn off anything that you can that brings up any reminders or takes up RAM or takes up internet bandwidth. Try and run as little programs as you can as possible. So on my screen, like on my computer right now, I'm running PowerPoint and I'm running Mozilla Firefox. That's all I'm trying to run right now. So try it before you use it as well. If you're going to be using edufire, you can request the ability to go into a room for before you can actually broadcast. You do get 30 minutes before. You can request a room to test it out, right?
You can go to an orientation session or something along those lines. So.
Okay.
Scheduled times.
Well, and you also get about 30 minutes before the webinar to sign on and to make sure that your video is coming through. For example, yesterday Koichi and I were doing a test run, and my video wasn't coming through correctly. Well, thanks to doing the test run, we were able to determine that was taking place. So test out that technology, test out your audio, test out your video, test out your PowerPoint. And speaking of audio video, that's we just went along with that. Getting a good headset. I use a Plantronics. This is a pretty nice nice headset that I use. That's got noise cancellation in my audio. The microphone is very strong. What are you using there, Koichi?
I'm actually just using my MacBook Pro camera and audio, but oftentimes I will use a
Perfect
mic, but not today.
Got it. Got it. Well, make sure you spending a little bit of money on that is not a bad way to go. This headset was, I believe, $45, and I really don't think you need to go any more than that. Also, make sure that you test transitions, especially if you have multiple speakers that are pushing between multiple presentations. I've helped administrate webinars where there are upwards to 3 different presenters, each with 3 different presentations. The only way that is going to run smoothly is if you test it. So test and practice for doing so. And that's the importance of running a dry run. This is our picture of a wooden post that says dry run on it. We figured that was appropriate for the dry run slide. It's very important to run a dry run. This is a dress rehearsal. It's not just testing out the technology, but it's running it as you will when the webinar actually takes place. If you're bringing in another webinar presenter, make sure you give them some time and you get a feel for the different style that they have. They might be speaking too softly. They might not be having inflection in their voice. Their presentation may not be good. Make sure you run a dry run. So there's a few reasons you want to. Technology is important to test it out. Testing it out and practicing with your panelists, handing off and testing handoffs, testing polls to make sure that they're working well is a very important thing to do as well. So really, the basic idea is here, and as you'll see throughout the webinar, we're not going to be focusing every slide the same amount of time that we will. We're going to focus more time into areas that we see as more important. But now that I look at our time, we are already at 3:37, so we're gonna keep moving on. It's important to have some test participants to make sure that they can hear your audio all right. Maybe even using some family or friends to test to make sure that everything is going smoothly. Let's move on and talk about marketing your webinar, and here are some pictures of various social media platforms that you can use to market. But what we really look at as some of the most important areas to use to market your webinar, make sure you promote it on your website. We have a webinar page that shows all the most upcoming webinars, and actually we're going to be bringing that in through an RSS feed so that when a new webinar comes up, it automatically goes onto that part of our website. On your blog, mention it in your blog, either cross-promote that webinar or use a widget, use an image on the right side that promotes your next upcoming webinar. Email marketing is one of the ways that we have gotten a large majority of people participating on our webinars. We push them out through both our monthly newsletter, which is we feature our webinars on the left side of the screen with all of our various events, but we also, because the people in our list have given us the thumbs up, we also send what we call a smart alert once a month that lets those participants, those users, know that we have an exclusive or complimentary webinar that's available to them. And lastly, social media. Koichi, what are some of your thoughts on some of the different social media tools that we can use to get the word out?
I think when it comes to social media, it's out of all these four different ways to market your webinar, social media is the easiest way to become an expert in whatever you're giving a webinar on, and it's the quickest way as well. And I think what all these things show is that you have to become an expert, at least quote unquote an expert in terms of what other people see before people are going to start coming to your classes, or before people become evangelists of your webinars. And giving webinars can be part of that, but it's really important to have other sources as well to show that you're an expert. And things like Twitter is just is becoming great. Facebook also is just becoming more like Twitter, which I think makes it better. And there's lots of other things as well, like YouTube. You can make videos that show that you're good at what you're talking about, and you can create.
And I know that
through
I mentioned blog as the second bullet, which of course is a part of social media. The reason I mention that is because we really look at these as an integrated system. We strongly recommend that you look at your marketing as not just different pieces that are disconnected. We really want you to have a system that is connected to an entire operation. If you've read Michael Gerber's E-Myth, it's a book by a guy who looked at McDonald's and what makes McDonald's so successful. It's because they have operations. What we recommend is you do your best to operationalize your marketing system through your website, your email, your usage of social media. The big thing, though, that when we're talking about marketing your webinar is that you understand that this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. This webinars are ways for you to prove credibility and build relationships. And these take time, and especially in the beginning, don't expect to get a huge amount of people participating on your webinar if you don't yet have a huge list. One of the great things that edufire does is that I just had a no really from Ren. Yes. Really, the edufire community is such an engaging community that I was so surprised that I just put my webinar up on edufire, didn't promote it other than just making a few tweets and posting it on my Facebook, and all of a sudden more than 60 people are registered for the Facebook webinar. So it's really incredible how strong of a community is here on edufire. The next one is planning your waiting room, and these are just 3 questions we want to ask you. Are you going to interact with your audience like we did during our waiting room? We had people sharing where they were from. We even had some of our participants helping us to make sure that they could hear us and that they could see us. Are you going to use music? One of my webinar programs, basically about 15 minutes before each webinar, I play different sounds and I come back in as the narrator. I make it very fun. I make it as it's a radio talk show. Hi, this is Brad Kleiman. You were just listening to Bill Withers Use Me. We're going to be getting started in 15 minutes, and it's glad to be here to talk to you about email marketing. So really make it fun. Include music. Potentially consider using games. Koichi, we talked the other day about various PowerPoint games that you could get your participant engaged on.
Yeah, you can find them on the internet. I haven't particularly found one that's very good. In fact, most of them are pretty bad. But you can make up your own games. Like I've set up 5 or 6 whiteboards in the classroom and promoted people to presenters and let them have a drawing contest. One thing I'd add about your waiting room, I think waiting rooms are really important. I just figured that out very recently, probably thanks to Brad. But it really sets the tone for how the rest of your webinar is going to go. If you come on at the last minute, people aren't nearly as engaged. But if you come on early, you talk with people and make people feel comfortable about being there, it's going to be a lot more fun during your webinar for the audience and for you as well.
Jeremiah just brought up letting people doodle. I actually haven't given my users the ability to doodle because GoToWebinar doesn't have that as a technical option. Within Adobe Connect, I also haven't, just because I've come from the GoToWebinar into edufire from a platform perspective. It could work very well with some things. When you're getting into the 50, 60, upwards to 100 people even on Adobe Connect, it could get kind of hairy. Let's see how our timing goes with the webinar, and let's see what happens if we can open it up to various people being able to draw on our webinar program. Let's talk about.
The sun is following me.
What's that?
The sun is following me.
Oh, okay. Well, the next one is starting your webinar. There's when I started doing webinars, because there are so many things. It's kind of like that golf swing. You think, okay, I got to have my knees down. I got to have my back a little bit arched. I have to have my feet this way. I have to have my grip this way. And you're thinking about all these things. And if you know Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, in order to either eliminate a bad habit or implement a good habit, you need to consciously and intentionally do these things. Sometimes the best way to do that is have little post-it notes by your computer and write them up and put them up onto your wall of the various things that you need to remind yourself to do. Sometimes I was pushing the start button, but I wasn't pushing *1 to start the broadcast, and I was forgetting to push the record button so that I actually had a recording. So remind yourself what you want those 3 things to do, such as pushing the right buttons, recording the webinar, and also consider the importance of launching promptly. So what I was doing when I first got started was I would write down the phone number and the access code in GoToWebinar. I would put remember to press start, remember to press record, and remember to broadcast. So I would put those 4 things on there so that just in case my phone dropped the connection, just in case I forgot to press record, I just went through those few things and boom, 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 went through them and did them and made sure that I did it. Brett's post-it reads record my meeting. I like that. I definitely have to agree with you on that one. The next one is introduce the webinar. We want to start out on a good foot. We want to start out letting people know that this is going to be engaging. We want to show them, we want to push our enthusiasm. We want to push our inflection, and a few things that we're going to look at in the next slides. Getting started off right, getting started off by showing them that this is not going to be that average webinar spoken with that guy that has a monotone voice and doesn't really have any inflection and just talks like this and speaks too fast. You know how much this is terrible? You've been on one of those webinars like this. It's terrible. It's terrible. We don't want that. We want to make sure that everyone in the call practices things like inflection and voice and pitch, and we're going to look at those in the next few slides. But when it comes to introduce, make sure in the beginning, and we did this in the beginning of ours, why are you here? Why are we happy that you're here? What are the various learning objectives that you're going to come away with? Housekeeping, are you going to be able to have audio? Are we going to be able to hear you? If not, and there is going to be a Q&A, when will it be? How can you access the Q&A? I always say, up in the top right of the GoToWebinar dialog box, you'll see the questions button. Click on the plus sign and submit your questions. At the end of the webinar, we'll have 15 minutes and try and do our best to cover every question during the program. Introduction of speakers is also, of course, one of the most important things you need to do in that introduction. Some people will just get into the presentation without giving any background on why they are credible enough to be able to run this program. Covering the agenda would be considered as a part of the introduction slide, but it sometimes as well is one that is lapsed and people forget about it. Make sure you cover things like the specific takeaways, the key takeaways, the learning outcomes that someone is going to get by participating and staying on this webinar, and also deliver those expectations. So really, what is it you're going to be getting? A lot of times presentation experts will say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them again. And that has a lot to do with, in the end of our webinar today, you're going to see what we're going to come back to and talk about what it was that we covered that were the most important things that we want to make sure that you take away from this program. Now one of the last slides is delivering your content, and this is where our timing is great, Koichi. I want to make sure that we focus on this a good amount because this is a very, very important, if not the most important area, which is delivering your content in an engaging manner. Let's look at a few of the most important things, because when you're delivering something over a webinar, now if it's not on Adobe Connect and you don't see me like you see me right now, you can't see me. So 55% and you couldn't see Koichi. Most communication is nonverbal, so 55% is visual. We base how we communicate with people on our body language. Now you can see my body language. You can see when I'm smiling. But if this is a webinar, like some WebEx webinars, people are still not pushing video. GoToWebinar, it's very unlikely that you see video. That 55% is gone. So you need to focus on the vocal and the verbal. And as you'll see, verbal, what you're saying only counts for 7%. People listen based upon if they like the way you sound. That's why it's so incredible on webinar. It's so important on webinars that you do some of the things that we're going to talk about on this slide. The first one is inflection, enthusiasm, and pauses. Now that, of course, was an example of too long of a pause, but what's really interesting is that when you remove the words that you know you need to remove, and actually I'd be interested if everyone on this on the chat box put in the words that you say too much. I'll tell you the words that I say too much. I say kind of. I say you know. I say basically. I say essentially. And I say easy too much. I have those 5 words on my wall right now, because I say those words too much. If I want to remove those words from my speech, I need to intentionally and consciously know that I say them. Now, the next time you're thinking about using the words you know, which I would be willing to bet most of us on this call say too much of, and this isn't me, I'm not trying to be offensive. Obviously, I don't personally know a lot of you. But if you know to not say you know, and instead of saying you know, take a pause, that will make your statement that much more impactful. You knows, likes, they're just filler content. Remove the content, fill it with a pause. It'll make that content much more important. What's inflection? Inflection is where you go like this. It's where you point out and you do this. That's where you change your pitch. Those were some different ways of how we can use inflection, enthusiasm, and pauses.
And
next, talking to the go on, Koichi.
I was going to say Brett has a really good point that the recorded classes aren't just for the students. The teachers can actually go back and look at the recordings as well and really analyze yourself at how you can improve. And I think if you're too defensive about yourself, about making improvements, then you're never going to get better. And I think this is a problem I see a lot of times where people, they're too defensive about making changes or improving themselves, and so they just dig themselves a hole and never improve. So use those recordings as well if you're a teacher.
One of the things that, one of the exercises that we went through, that I've gone through in multiple facilitation trainings, is where we speak in front of an audience, whether it's friends, peers, family members, and you ask them for their suggestions. And instead of rebutting, and instead of taking it offensively, take it as constructive criticism and ask these 2 words: what else? Because they always can get more, you can always get more suggestions. These are opportunities for you to grow. The next one is talking to the bullets. We want to make sure that you're not having a huge amount of text and copy on these PowerPoint slides. I actually was on a webinar earlier today, and literally it was a thesis that was on this. It was like a dissertation of content on one slide. We looked at it before. Make sure you have minimal amount of bullets. Speak to the bullets, but make sure that you don't have too much content. Using humor and pauses. Now, we talked about pauses before. I personally am a big fan of pauses. It shows that when you do pause, it shows that you have something important to say. Sometimes some people will say to me, "Hey, what's your elevator pitch?" And I'll say, "Well, how much time do I have? Right? How much time do I have for my elevator pitch?" And then for the first 5-10 seconds, I'll gather myself. Because you don't always need the allotted time that you've got. Now, my focus on webinars is that I want to fill my participants with so much good content that they leave thinking, oh my God, I got so much good stuff. But I want them to focus on a few most important things that they can actually put into action. So when it comes to those pauses, when it comes to those things we were looking at before, those are the things that help make that participant realize, I really got a lot of value from this webinar. How can they also get value from the webinar? By being entertained and by being engaged. I hope that you've laughed a few times during this presentation. Who knows? Unfortunately, we can't see ya. We're going to hopefully guess that you have been. And actually, Koichi did mention that later on he's going to be singing a song for you. So,
Apparently,
Next, looking at looking at the camera is of course an important thing. Koichi and I have both been doing our absolute best to look at the camera throughout the entire presentation and make you hopefully that you can see that we truly are engaged and we truly want to be looking into your beautiful eyes. Smiling. Koichi, can you say something without smiling right now? Well, that's going to be hard because you're just going to be smiling. When you talk on the phone to someone and you're talking like this, now I'm talking like this, and you can hear that if I talk like this, all I did was smile. All I did was smile. I'm not even trying to sound funny right now, but because I'm smiling and because I'm forcing myself to smile, it kind of sounds a little fake, but the idea is, I know that was creepy, Ren. I know. That was very creepy. But by forcing yourself to smile, by forcing yourself to have a good time, you will make a more engaging and more entertaining webinar. And lastly, interactivity. We've tried to make our webinar extremely active today over the past 54 minutes by interacting with people based upon what they write into the chat messages. We've done a few polls, and in fact, I'd like to do another poll right now, Koichi, if you could bring up let's just think of a poll on the fly. Do you think this webinar was funny? I'm curious if what people think about that. But by having some of that live dialogue, by having some polls with Adobe Connect, don't quit your day job. By having the ability to break out into breakout sessions, we can keep our webinar extremely interactive. Here's a slide from Power Presentations Incorporated. These are experts in PowerPoint delivery, and this is a good slide that helps look at the do's and don'ts. Do push your energy, do pause and breathe. Be concise, articulate, enunciate. The word enunciate is a good one to practice and just say over and over again. We used to say, what was the one? I used to be in drama clubs, so we would say, the terrorist has very oddly shaped feet. Actually, that's not from Drama Club. That's from Anchorman with Will Ferrell. Using inflection, changing your voice, using high pitch and low pitch. These are what keeps people engaged. Don't regurgitate your script. Don't read straight from it. Don't use jargon. Don't rush. Don't ramble. And don't over-apologize. Some of the do's and don'ts of maximizing your voice. And lastly, the last slide, let's make sure we have an email follow-up. Let's get a feel for making sure that we know that these webinars are opportunities for us to continue to engage and to build relationships. Let's get a survey. Let's get a survey from participants of what they thought of the webinar. Let's get testimonials. Of course, what I'm going to ask every one of you that have been on this webinar, go on to edufire and fill out your a testimonial if you thought this was a powerful webinar for you. The most important question that you can ask, though, if you do have a survey tool that you want to use for your webinar, is this one question: would you recommend this webinar to others? And actually, Koichi, that's the last question, the last poll that I'd like you to bring up, because it looks like 92% of us thought that this webinar was funny. The reason I like this question so much is because it's a yes or no. There's only two answers, and that's it's a yes or it's a no. And not only does it tell you that if the user liked it, but and it's not a maybe so, it's a yes or no. It's not just because it tells you if you liked it, but it says whether or not they would push it to others as well. And if they would push it to others, if they would recommend it to others, that's saying something that's very, very important. And that's saying that you have a pretty good webinar. So make sure you try and get that question answered. So we are now to our few-minute mark. I know that we had some time that we wanted to make sure that we had for Q&A. We're gonna push back. I know that the webinar was scheduled for 4, just because of the topic and because we really want to make this something that if you do have some questions that we have an open discussion about, we're going to push back. We're going to continue speaking. We're going to continue hanging out for a little bit. These are our 10 steps. We're going to send you this webinar along with our PDF one-pager on these 10 steps and associated bullets with each. let's do some Q&A. We do have just a few minutes. On a normal webinar, I'm going to say try not to only keep 2 minutes for Q&A. Try to make sure you do have that 10 minutes. But again, we do look at this as an extenuating type of program, a complimentary webinar to really help you. So if you've got any questions, let's bring them up in our webinar area. And while we have some questions that are coming up, I'm going to go ahead and put on my my foo-foo outfit. Okay, so any questions? It looks like Brett's got breakfast time. Brett, where are you? Where are you that you have breakfast time coming up?
While we're waiting for an answer, we have one question here. Are you guys using screen share or a PowerPoint presentation? And the answer to that is a little bit of both. This is a PowerPoint presentation that Brad is running and showing to us on a screen share, just because Adobe Connect doesn't render some of the stuff or some of the actions on the new PowerPoint correctly. He's making sure everything looks the way we want it to by doing a screen share of the presentation. Which is kind of a hack, but it works pretty good. And that's how I would have to do Prezi as well, since there's no Prezi option in Adobe Connect.
I do recommend going along with that, Koichi. If you are going to be doing webinars often, like I give webinars, as I said, sometimes up to once a day, I highly recommend that you invest in a second monitor. A second monitor can, now that it's such a commodity, you can get a second monitor sometimes for less than $100. I recommend that because it really helps keep everything separate. I have my webinar system on the right side, and I have my full screen PowerPoint version that's what's being recorded and that's what's being broadcast on the left. It helps me speak to my presentation and keeps my webinar technology all in the same place. So thanks for that question. Wonderful question. Looks like we got a question. Any tips for becoming an expert in something that's in a field that's not filled with many experts, where it's harder to find people to link for niche topics? Well, that is a very good question. One of the things that I would say back to you is that sounds like an incredible opportunity for you to establish yourself as a credible expert. To establish yourself as an expert is not just in the ways of webinars. You want to establish yourself as an expert in multiple medium. Try out a blog. A blog is a great way to do so. Post once a week or once every few days on various topics related to that industry or market topic. Consider taking videos of yourself talking about the topic. You could either do so with a webcam, or you could purchase a flip video camera or a mini DV and be able to produce high quality content that proves you as a credible expert on videos as well. I recommend, if you want to prove yourself as a credible individual, don't put a ram's head onto your video. That's not something that you want to do if you want to prove yourself as an expert. Especially, don't do something with like the Phantom of the Opera top hat and mask, because that would just be suicide. But thank you for the question.
One thing I would add to that is that the first step is to just either decide that you're an expert or pretend that you're an expert, and then eventually it'll be so. At least that's what I've done in a lot of things. If you say you're an expert, then it's much more likely that you're going to follow through and actually become the expert in something. And 99% of people just talk about it, and 1% of people will actually go out and do it and become that expert. And that's what you have to do. That's the first step and the easiest / hardest step. I don't know which one it is.
Our next question is there a best place to host a webinar? I don't know who it was that asked that question. Are you saying in terms of physical location? Is that what the question was? Okay, physical location really, I have to say, isn't incredibly important if the following apply. There's as little noise as possible. there's as little noise as possible. That would be my main thing. So if you can eliminate noise, if you are going to be using video, that your video is coming in clearly. Sometimes being outside in the park, it might not be the best place for you to do a webinar. However, I will say that based upon my experiences, I've actually had to run webinars while I'm out in the field, literally, and at a busy place, but because I had a good headset and a good microphone, I was still able to broadcast a webinar where people had no idea that I was in a noisy place. We just want to get you moving more towards really making this something that reduces as much variability as possible. All right, so there were some great questions there. Any others that we can answer before we sign off? We're going to still hang out with you for a bit.
There's one more question down there. How can you help rein in a member of your audience who is trying to co-opt your webinar, i.e. like a class clown or something like that? Does that mean maybe corrupt? I have no idea. That's a good question. Oh. Brad is coming up again. Brad is coming up again. There's an echo on there. It looks like you have your audio on the other one. Let me on and off on this side.
Yeah, my computer completely shut down, so that's something that, again, thanks to have multiple computers running the system.
Nope. Sounds good to me.
Echo?
Oh wait, no, I get an echo now.
Okay, now we got two.
Oh wait, no, I get an echo now.
There we go. Oh yeah, that's because we're using my Mac and I'm not plugged into my headset. So this is a good example, everyone, of technology went wrong, but because of backup that we had in place, it made it not too much horrible situation. I'm hoping that because it shut down over there, we didn't lose the recording. I don't know.
Recording good.
Well, I am going to see if there's any final questions. We'll take them now. If not, we're going to go ahead and sign off in a few minutes. Thank you so much to Koichi. Thank you to edufire for hosting this from your technology platform. I really appreciate all of your time. I hope that we gave you a few specific points to really take advantage of and make very strong knockout webinars thanks to this webinar. So thank you all so much. And with that, Koichi,
this was a lot of fun.
Final words?
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you, Brad.
You're welcome. With every long journey, and so if your journey of becoming better at webinars if that's the journey that you're on, every journey starts with one small step. So hopefully this 60-minute webinar was one of those steps in the right direction. So thanks again so much, everyone. Bye.